Arrogant Navy SEALs laughed when they saw the faded ink on a nurse's wrist, mocking her for playing pretend. They had no idea the most powerful admiral in the room was standing right behind them, and he was about to deliver a reality check that would break them to their core. The salty, marine layer of San Diego morning air always stopped at the heavy double doors of the Naval Medical Center. Inside Ward 4, Bravo, the atmosphere was entirely different. It smelled of heavy-duty antiseptic, sterile linens, and the unmistakable metallic tang of adrenaline. This wasn't a standard recovery floor. 4. Bravo was the designated wing for Tier 1 operators. When the military's most elite ghosts got broken in places that didn't officially exist, they were sent here to be put back together. Olivia Jenkins was not easily intimidated, which was exactly why she had been transferred to this floor. At 38, she possessed a quiet, unshakable demeanor that younger nurses often mistook for coldness. She didn't gossip at the nurses' station, she didn't complain about the grueling 12-hour shifts, and most importantly, she never let the hyper-aggressive bravado of her patients rattle her. And in Ward 4, bravado was the primary currency. The current occupants of room 412 were a handful of Navy SEALs from a West Coast-based team who had been caught in a vicious ambush during a training exercise overseas. They were battered, heavily bandaged, and fiercely restless. The loudest of the bunch was Petty Officer First Class Derek Miller. Miller was a mountain of a man, covered in tribal ink and shrapnel scars, currently laid up with a shattered femur and a heavily bruised ego. Miller hated the hospital. He hated being confined to a bed, he hated the food, but most of all, he hated feeling weak. To compensate, he made a sport out of terrorizing the medical staff. He barked orders, openly questioned the doctor's prescribing methods, and had already brought 2 junior nurses to tears with his abrasive, biting sarcasm. "Look at them," Miller sneered one Tuesday morning, loud enough for the hallway to hear. He was pointing a remote control at the door as Olivia walked past with a chart, a bunch of civilian paper pushers. They treat a stubbed toe and think they've seen combat. "Hey, Florence Nightingale, my IV is beeping. You gonna fix it, or do I need to call in an airstrike?" Olivia stopped, turned on her heel, and walked into the room. Her expression was entirely blank. She didn't offer a polite, accommodating customer service smile. She simply stepped up to the infusion pump, her eyes scanning the digital readout. "The line is occluded because you've been bending your elbow, Petty Officer Miller," Olivia said, her voice steady and pitched perfectly flat. She reached out, firmly straightening his massive arm. "Keep it straight, or I'll splint it to a board like a toddler." The room went dead silent. Chief Brian Carter, a highly decorated veteran, sitting in the corner chair with his arm in a sling, raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Miller's face flushed red. He wasn't used to being spoken to like a child, especially not by a civilian nurse who barely cleared 5'4". "You got a lot of nerve, sweetheart. You know who you're talking to?" "A patient in bed too," Olivia replied, not even looking at his face as she adjusted the tape on his IV site. "Heart rate is elevated. Blood pressure is 135/85. You're agitated. I suggest you breathe, Miller. You're popping your own stitches." As she reached across him to check the fluid bag, the cuff of her navy blue scrub top slid down her right arm. For a brief second, the stark fluorescent lights illuminated the inside of her forearm. There, etched into her pale skin, was a small, faded black tattoo. It wasn't a butterfly, a quote, or a decorative mandala. It was a jagged, primitive design, a broken spear intersecting a pair of medical shears, surrounded by a sequence of alphanumeric coordinates and the letters E7T. Miller's eagle eyes locked onto it instantly. He didn't recognize the exact insignia, but he recognized the style. It was a death card tattoo, the kind operators got in dirty back alley shops in foreign countries to memorialize a fallen teammate or a nightmare deployment. Olivia caught his stare, quickly pulled her sleeve back down to her wrist, and turned to leave. "Wait a second," Miller called out, his voice losing its playful mockery and taking on a sharp, hostile edge. "What the hell is that on your arm?" "It's none of your business," Olivia said, without looking back, stepping out of the room and letting the heavy wooden door swing shut behind her. But the seed had been planted. In the hyper-masculine, fiercely territorial world of special operations, stolen valor was an unforgivable sin. And to Derek Miller, this quiet, unassuming civilian nurse, parading around with a combat memorial tattoo, was not just pathetic, it was a personal insult. The tension in Ward 4, Bravo, simmered for 3 days. Miller had made it his personal mission to scrutinize Olivia's every move, whispering to the other SEALs whenever she entered the room. They watched her, with narrowed, suspicious eyes. The mutual respect that usually formed between the elite patients and their caregivers was completely absent. Then, on a Friday afternoon, the fragile quiet of the ward shattered. Chief Carter, the quiet observer in the corner chair, suddenly collapsed mid-sentence while eating his lunch. The plastic tray clattered to the linoleum floor. A split second later, the harsh, shrill alarm of his heart monitor pierced the air. "Chief!" Miller shouted, struggling against his pinned leg to reach his teammate. Olivia was at the nurse's station when she heard the alarm. She didn't run. She moved with a terrifying, calculated speed, bursting through the doors of room 412 before the code alarm even echoed over the hospital intercom. Carter was convulsing, his skin rapidly turning a sickly shade of ash. His surgical incision, a deep abdominal wound from a high-caliber round, had ruptured internally. Blood was rapidly pooling under his bandages, soaking through the thick white gauze and spilling onto the sheets. He was hemorrhaging, and fast. Code Blue, room 412. "Get Dr. Hayes now," Olivia yelled over her shoulder to a panicked junior nurse in the hallway. She vaulted onto the bed next to the seizing chief. The other SEALs in the room were shouting, their combat instincts firing blindly in a situation they couldn't shoot their way out of. "Do something!" Miller roared, his face pale with terror as he watched his chief bleed out. Olivia completely ignored him. Her sleeves were pushed up past her elbows, her bare arms slick with Carter's blood. With ruthless efficiency, she ripped away the soaked bandages. She didn't wait for the doctor. She drove both of her fists directly into Carter's open abdomen, finding the ruptured artery by feel alone, and clamped down with all her body weight. "I have the bleeder," she said, her voice dropping an octave, dead calm amidst the screaming alarms. "Give me a clamp, now!" she barked at the junior nurse, who had frozen in the doorway with a crash cart. "Move your feet, Collins. Clamp." Dr. William Hayes sprinted into the room seconds later, followed by a surgical team. They found Olivia kneeling on the bed, her hands buried inside the chief, her face entirely devoid of panic. "I've got pressure on the descending aorta," Olivia told Dr. Hayes, not breaking eye contact. "He lost at least 2 liters. You have about 4 minutes to get him to the OR before he goes into irreversible hypovolemic shock." "Good God, Jenkins! You saved his life," Hayes breathed, quickly moving in to replace her hands with surgical clamps. "Let's move him! Now!" The medical team swarmed the bed, rushing Carter out of the room in a flurry of shouted orders and squeaking wheels. Suddenly, room 412 was devastatingly quiet. Olivia stood by the empty, blood-soaked bed. She was breathing heavily, her scrubs ruined, her hands and forearms painted crimson. She walked over to the stainless steel sink in the corner of the room, turned on the faucet with her elbow, and began to aggressively scrub the blood off her skin with coarse iodine soap. Miller sat in his bed, staring at her. He had just watched this woman perform a maneuver that most seasoned trauma surgeons would hesitate to do in a sterile operating room, let alone in a panicked ward. For a fleeting moment, a wave of profound respect washed over him. But then, as Olivia scrubbed the blood away from her right forearm, the black ink of her tattoo was revealed again. The broken spear, the shears, the coordinates, E7T. Miller's ego, bruised by his own helplessness during the crisis, roared back to life. He couldn't reconcile the heroic act he had just witnessed with his deeply ingrained prejudice. To him, only operators, only brotherhood, possessed that kind of ice-cold courage. A civilian with fake ink was a fraud, no matter what she had just done. "You think you're pretty tough, don't you?" Miller's voice broke the silence, dripping with venom. Olivia paused, the water running over her hands. She looked over her shoulder at him, her eyes dark. "Excuse me? I saw what you did. It was good, but don't think that gives you a pass," Miller spat, pointing a thick, calloused finger at her arm. "I know guys who died earning ink like that. Guys who bled in the dirt so civilians like you could sleep safe in your comfortable little beds." Olivia turned off the water. She reached for a paper towel, drying her hands methodically. She didn't say a word. "What is it?" Miller pressed, leaning forward, his anger masking his trauma. "You date a Marine once?" Buy that at a parlor on the boardwalk to look edgy? Echo 7 Tango. It's pathetic. You steal our symbols because you want to feel important, but you have no idea what it means to actually be in the shit. Olivia tossed the paper towel into the biohazard bin. She walked toward the door, stopping just at the foot of Miller's bed. She looked down at him, not with anger, but with a profound, chilling pity. You should rest, Miller, Olivia said softly. Chief Carter is going to make it. That's all that matters today. Don't patronize me, Miller barked. Just cover that trash up. The Fleet Admiral is coming down here tomorrow to pin Carter, and if he sees a civilian playing dress-up with a fake memorial piece, he'll have your job. Consider that a warning. Olivia's hand hovered over the door handle. For a fraction of a second, her jaw tightened. The coordinates on her arm burned against her skin. A heavy phantom pain from a desert canyon halfway across the world a lifetime ago. I'll keep that in mind, petty officer, Olivia replied quietly and walked out into the corridor. She left Miller alone with his pride, completely unaware that the storm he had just invited was already on its way. Admiral Thomas Reynolds wasn't just coming to pin a medal on Chief Carter. He was coming to the ward for a very different reason, and the arrogant SEAL in room 412 was about to learn a brutal lesson about the ghosts that walk the halls of military hospitals. The following morning, Ward 4, Bravo was practically humming with a nervous, electric energy. The usual scent of bleach and iodine was entirely overpowered by the sharp smell of floor wax and freshly starched uniforms. Today was not a standard Saturday. Chief Brian Carter had survived the night, his vital signs stabilizing after the massive internal hemorrhage. He was awake, pale but lucid, propped up in his bed. Next to him, Petty Officer First Class Derek Miller sat rigidly in his own bed, wearing a crisp, short-sleeved hospital gown. Despite his shattered femur, Miller had insisted on sitting at attention, his posture perfectly straight. Fleet Admiral Thomas Reynolds, commander of Naval Special Warfare, was on the floor. Admiral Reynolds was a legend whispered about in the dark corners of Bud S training and deployed forward operating bases. He was a man forged in the brutal conflicts of the early 2000s, carrying shrapnel in his shoulder and the weight of countless classified operations behind his piercing gray eyes. When Reynolds walked into a room, oxygen seemed to become a privilege. Accompanied by his aide, Captain Gregory Mitchell, and the hospital's chief of staff, Dr. William Hayes, Reynolds strode into room 412. He bypassed the formalities, walking directly to Chief Carter's bedside. "Chief," Reynolds said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded absolute silence. "I hear you decided to make things interesting for the medical staff yesterday." Carter managed a weak, respectful smile. "Just keeping them on their toes, Admiral. Thank you for coming, sir." Reynolds nodded, pulling a small, velvet-lined box from his pocket. "Your team extracted under heavy fire, Carter. You held the defensive line despite taking a 7.62 round to the gut. That bought your boys the 90 seconds they needed for the medevac. You earned this." With precise, practiced movements, Reynolds pinned the silver star to the folded uniform resting on Carter's bedside table. The room was perfectly silent, steeped in the profound reverence of the Brotherhood. Miller watched with fierce pride, his chest swelling. This was what it was all about. The blood, the sacrifice, the recognition from a man who had walked through the same fire. "Now," Reynolds said, turning his formidable gaze toward Dr. Hayes. "I read the after-action report from yesterday's Code Blue. Dr. Hayes, you stated that Carter would have bled out in under 3 minutes if not for the immediate physical intervention of a civilian nurse." "That's correct, Admiral," Dr. Hayes replied, adjusting his glasses nervously. "It was the most extraordinary piece of battlefield triage I've ever seen in a civilian setting." She manually clamped his descending aorta with her bare hands. Reynolds' eyes narrowed with intense interest. "I want to meet her. Bring her in." Miller shifted uncomfortably in his bed. The pride radiating from the medal ceremony suddenly soured. He remembered the ink on Olivia's arm. He remembered her cold, dismissive attitude. He couldn't let a fraud stand in front of the Fleet Admiral and receive praise while wearing stolen valor. "With all due respect, Admiral," Miller spoke up, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Reynolds slowly turned to look at the petty officer. "Speak, Miller." "Sir, the nurse who treated Chief Carter, she did a good job yesterday. But you should know who you're dealing with," Miller said, his jaw tightening. She's a civilian parading around with a Tier 1 memorial tattoo on her forearm. The broken spear, shears, and coordinates. She's wearing operator ink, sir. I warned her to cover it up before you arrived. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Captain Mitchell stiffened. Stolen valor was a deeply personal offense to men who had buried their brothers. To wear the ink of the fallen without paying the price in blood was an insult that demanded immediate correction. Reynolds did not yell. He did not blink. His face became an unreadable mask of weathered stone. Is that so? Reynolds asked quietly. Yes, sir. I felt it was my duty to inform you before she disrespected the uniform in your presence, Miller replied, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. He was protecting the integrity of the teams. Just then, the heavy wooden door of room 412 pushed open. Olivia Jenkins stepped into the room. She was wearing fresh, crisp, navy blue scrubs, a stethoscope draped perfectly around her neck. Her hair was pulled back into a tight, utilitarian bun. As she walked in, she immediately felt the crushing weight of the stares directed at her. Dr. Hayes looked anxious, Captain Mitchell looked furious, and Miller looked triumphant. Olivia stopped at the foot of Chief Carter's bed, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She didn't shrink under the intimidating gaze of the high-ranking officers. You asked for me, Dr. Hayes? Olivia asked, her voice calm and even. Reynolds stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He towered over her, his broad shoulders blocking out the fluorescent light. He looked down at her hands, then slowly raised his eyes to meet hers. Nurse Jenkins, Reynolds said, his tone dangerously soft. Petty Officer Miller informs me that you are sporting some unauthorized ink on your right arm, ink that belongs to my operators. Miller smirked from his bed. It was over. She was about to be humiliated and likely fired. Olivia didn't flinch. She didn't look at Miller. She kept her eyes locked dead on the Fleet Admiral. Slowly, deliberately, she reached over with her left hand and pushed the sleeve of her right arm up past her elbow, exposing the jagged black tattoo under the harsh hospital lights. The broken spear, the medical shears, the alphanumeric code, E7T. Captain Mitchell took a sharp breath, preparing to dress her down. But Reynolds didn't shout. He didn't order her out. Instead, the 4-star Fleet Admiral's face went completely pale. His jaw slackened, his eyes tracing the jagged lines of the broken spear. He took a staggering step back, as if he had just been physically struck. For 10 agonizing seconds, nobody breathed. The heart monitors beeped steadily, an absurdly normal sound in a room that felt like it had just been plunged into a vacuum. Leave us, Reynolds suddenly ordered. His voice wasn't a roar, it was a tight, choked rasp. Dr. Hayes and Captain Mitchell exchanged bewildered glances. Sir? Mitchell asked. Everyone who is not in a hospital bed, out. Now, Reynolds commanded, never taking his eyes off Olivia. The doctor and the aide quickly scrambled out of the room, the door clicking shut behind them. Only Carter, Miller, Reynolds, and Olivia remained. Miller's stomach twisted into a cold, heavy knot. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The Admiral wasn't angry at the nurse. He was staring at her as if he had just seen a ghost walk out of the fog of war. Slowly, his hands trembling slightly, Admiral Thomas Reynolds reached up to the collar of his pristine, heavily decorated dress uniform. He unbuttoned his tailored jacket, slipping his left arm out, and then began to forcefully roll up the sleeve of his white dress shirt. He extended his thick, scarred forearm and placed it right next to Olivia's. Miller's breath hitched in his throat. Chief Carter let out a low, disbelieving whisper. There, etched into the hardened, weathered skin of the Fleet Admiral of Naval Special Warfare, was the exact same tattoo. The identical jagged broken spear, the intersecting medical shears. The same coordinates. A7T. My God, Reynolds whispered. His eyes locked on Olivia's face, searching the lines around her eyes. It's you. It's really you. Olivia gave a small, solemn nod. It's been a long time, Tommy. Miller felt the blood drain completely from his face. Tommy, a civilian nurse, had just called the Fleet Admiral by a nickname, and the Admiral was looking at her with an expression of absolute, unadulterated reverence. Admiral, what is going on? Miller stammered. His previous arrogance entirely dissolved into pure confusion and rising dread. Reynolds slowly turned to Miller. The vulnerability vanished, replaced instantly by the terrifying, cold fury of a Tier 1 commander. You think you know everything about the teams, Miller? Reynolds asked, his voice a lethal whisper. You think because you earned your trident, you have a monopoly on sacrifice? Reynolds pointed a heavy finger at Olivia. Let me educate you on a piece of classified history, petty officer. 12 years ago, Operation Red Dagger, Korangal Valley, Afghanistan. A joint task force went completely black. We were ambushed by a force of 200 insurgents. Our comms were jammed, our air support was grounded by a sandstorm, and our commanding officer was dead. Reynolds paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath, his eyes briefly closing as he relived the nightmare. I was a lieutenant commander back then. I took a piece of shrapnel to the femoral artery. I was bleeding out in the dirt of a bombed-out compound. We had an embedded Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, forward surgical team with us. They weren't supposed to be on the front line, but the front line found us. Reynolds turned back to look at Olivia. The fierce pride in his eyes was blinding. The extraction point was grid coordinate Echo 7 Tango. E7T, Reynolds continued, his voice echoing in the quiet room. When the perimeter collapsed, the surviving operators had to fall back, but I couldn't be moved. I was dead weight. Miller was staring at Olivia. His jaw literally dropped. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was crushing him. This civilian nurse? Reynolds said, the word dripping with venomous sarcasm as he threw Miller's insult back at him, refused the order to fall back. She stayed in the dirt at Echo 7 Tango. While my men fought hand-to-hand in the courtyard, Lieutenant Jenkins knelt in the mud, holding my artery closed with one hand and firing a standard-issue M9 Beretta at the doorway with the other. Silence slammed into the room. Carter's monitor beeped, a stark reminder of the exact same life-saving grip Olivia had used just 24 hours ago. She held the line for 45 minutes until the QRF arrived. Reynolds finished. She saved my life. She saved 3 other operators that night. She was awarded the Navy Cross, heavily classified, and medically discharged after a bullet shattered her left kneecap during the exfil. Reynolds stepped right up to Miller's bed, leaning over the paralyzed SEAL. The men who survived that night got this ink to remember the blood we left in the sand at Echo 7 Tango, Reynolds growled softly. She didn't steal our valor, Miller. She is our valor. And you dared to question her courage in my presence? Miller looked like he wanted the linoleum floor to open up and swallow him whole. His muscular frame seemed to shrink under the crushing weight of his own ignorance. He looked at Olivia, truly seeing her for the first time. He didn't see a civilian paper pusher. He saw the cold, unshakable composure of a battle-tested veteran who had stared into the abyss and didn't blink. Ma'am, Miller choked out, his voice cracking violently. Lieutenant Jenkins, I am so profoundly sorry. I was arrogant. I was out of line. I didn't know. Olivia finally stepped away from the foot of the bed. She walked over to Miller, her expression softening just a fraction. There was no gloating in her eyes. There was only the weary understanding of a woman who knew what trauma did to proud men. You're right, Miller. You didn't know, Olivia said quietly. But you assumed. You let your pride blind you to the fact that courage doesn't only wear a camouflage uniform. It wears scrubs. It wears civilian clothes. It fights in the shadows where nobody claps for you. She reached out and gently checked his IV line, the very thing she had been adjusting when he first mocked her. We don't do this job for the recognition, Olivia continued, her voice steady and warm. We do it for the person in the bed next to us. Remember that when you heal up and get back to your team. Miller swallowed hard, a single, unbidden tear escaping the corner of his eye. Yes, ma'am, I will. Admiral Reynolds took a step back, his composure fully restored. He buttoned his uniform jacket, concealing the broken spear once more. He looked at Olivia, snapping to a razor-sharp, flawless salute. It remains the honor of my life, Lieutenant Reynolds said. Olivia smiled faintly, a ghost of a grin, and returned the salute. Just doing my job, Admiral. Make sure you keep your blood pressure down. She turned and walked out of room 412, the heavy wooden doors swinging shut behind her. She didn't look back. She had charts to update, meds to push, and lives to save. Inside the room, the hyper-masculine bravado of Ward 4, Bravo had completely evaporated, replaced by a profound, reverent silence. Petty Officer Derek Miller sat quietly in his bed, staring at the closed door, knowing he had just met the most dangerous, courageous person in the hospital, and she didn't need to wear a uniform to prove it. True heroes rarely announce themselves, and courage is rarely found in the loudest voice in the room. Olivia's story is a powerful reminder that we walk among silent warriors every single day, and the deepest scars and greatest sacrifices are often hidden just beneath the surface. Never judge a book by its cover. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a reminder about true respect, and subscribe for more incredible real-life storytelling.
Hi, my name is Tran Tan, the owner and manager of Noble Tales. After watching the video, Just a Tattoo _ Navy SEALs ridiculed a nurse until the Admiral showed his arm, I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the reminder that we rarely know the full story behind someone's quiet confidence. The nurse in this story was judged by appearances, yet her actions revealed a depth of courage and sacrifice that others never expected. It's a powerful reflection on respect, humility, and the danger of making assumptions too quickly. Have you ever met someone who completely changed your first impression of them? And do you think true courage is often found in the people who don't seek recognition? If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, feel free to like and subscribe for more.